Ya, milik mo. Ben, patay ko kawan ko. Mamalita. Di ko ako. Hindi first pa lang.
Kahit saang bagay sa isip ay sa relihiyon man at politika, kailangan ang pagsasaliw sa iyong liwan. lalo na sa pagtuklas ng mga agham. Sa mga gamot at iba pa, sinasaliw nila mga bagay na kakaiba. Tulad din ng kultura, sayaw at musika. Mga lumad ng Mindanao, paglong iwak sa runay, gabang at kulintang. Kanilang isinasaliw sa pagkanta at pagsaya. Di lamang musika iniuugnay, saliw na salita. Kahit saang bagay sa isip ay magkatugma. Sa relihiyon man at politika, kailangan ang pagsasaliw sa iyong diwa. Lalo na sa pagtuklas ng mga agham. Sa mga gamot at iba pa, sinasaliw nila mga bagay na kakaiba. Tulad din ng kultura,
Okay, so good morning, everyone. We're here once again, live and alive at the NEDA RDC Hall of NEDA. Good morning to our participants via Zoom, and of course, good morning to the staff of NCIP and NEDA who are here with us this morning in the hall, and to our speaker, Sir Dr. Stanley Anongos. Good morning po. He will be introduced later. So for the organizations registered online, we once again acknowledge the participation of the different organizations. The Asian Farmers Association, the ATI CAR, Baguio General Hospital and Medical Center, Baguio Water District, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, BIGA, Bureau of Fire Protection CAR, Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources CAR, Cagayan Museum and Historical Research Center, Casa Duende Productions Incorporated, CAS SSD, CDA CAR, Center for Development Programs in the Cordillera, Civil Service Commission CAR, Cooperative Development Authority CAR, Cordillera Career Development College, Department of Environment and Natural Resources CAR, Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Training Institute, Department of Budget and Management, CAR, Department of Education, Department of Energy, Department of Foreign Affairs, Consular Office, Baguio, DepEd CCNHS, DepEd Central Office, DepEd Adiwang Elementary School, DepEd Baguio, Baguio Central School, the Baguio City National High School, Bakakang National High School, BCNHS Hillside, BCNSHS, the Crystal Cave Elementary School, Doña Aurora National High School, Irisa National High School, Milan National High School, San Carlos Heights Elementary School, DepEd Baguio Schools Division Office, DepEd Kalinga, or the Kalinga National High School, DepEd Mountain Province, Banawal National High School, Natunin Mountain Province, DepEd Mountain Province, Baokuan, DepEd Mountain Province, Balwang Elementary School in Sadanga Mountain Province, DepEd Mountain Province, the Balwang National High School, also in Sadanga, DILG CAR, Diteng, DOELFO, DOHCHD CAR, Don Mariano Marcos Memorial State University, Open University System, the DOST CAR, DOT CAR, DPWH CAR, DSWD CAR, DTI Baguio Benguet, DTI CAR, EMB CAR, the HEI St. Louis, the HEI St. Louis University and the University of Baguio, Igorota Foundation Incorporated, Indigenous Peoples Organization, IPMRs who are with us this morning, the LGUs Barangay Abiang in Atok Benguet, Bontoc Mountain Province, Bugyas Benguet, Dagyuman Abra, Kabayan Benguet, Kiangan Ifugao, Mayuyaw Ifugao, and Tuba Benguet, the National Housing Authority, National Meat Inspection Service CAR, NCIP offices in Apayao, Luna Office, Baguio City Office, Banawe Service Center, Benguet, CAR, Ifugao, and Kalinga, NCIP offices. We also have, of course, NEDA CAR, our host in this webinar series, NIA CAR, NICAR Regional Office 1, OCD CAR, OWA CAR, the Peace Organization, the People's Organization for Social Transformation, or POST, the Philippine Economic Zone Authority, PMSORC RFU CAR, Professional Regulation Commission CAR, Provincial Government of Cagayan, PSA RSSO CAR, the Regional Tripartite Wages and Productivity Board CAR, St. Louis School Incorporated, St. Louis School of Sablan, Securities and Exchange Commission, Benguet Extension Office, and we have, of course, our SUCs, Abra State Institute of Science and Technology, the Benguet State University, the Benguet State University Center for Culture and the Arts, the IFSU International Innovation Center for Indigenous Studies, Ifugao State University, Kalinga State University, Mountain Province State Polytechnic College, University of the Philippines Baguio, University of the Philippines Los Baños, University of the Philippines Baguio, Cordillera Studies Center, the Tubtaba Foundation, Western Skies Basao, and YesO. And of course, we have our individual participants via Zoom and Facebook. Okay, so thank you for participating. Thank you for watching once again, and we hope you could actively participate in this webinar. So to move on, during the last webinar held on October 7, we'll just have a wrap up or the summary of the first webinar. Dr. Rovelios, our speaker, tackled cultural misrepresentation. He presented images of misrepresentation of Igorots in various media and explained that these are committed due to general ignorance, lack of cultural knowledge, and prevailing stereotypes against Igorots, which have been presented as fact and accepted as true. He pointed out that due to ethnocentrism, or judging a culture based on values and norms of another culture, chauvinism, which means designating cultures as superior or inferior, and discrimination or the manner of making judgments based on ethnicity and acting on biases against the inferior culture, these dangerous misrepresentation of Igorots still persist. These, these misrepresentations persist, he said, because they are deeply rooted in history and institutions, becoming truth through constant repetition from colonial and contemporary times. Dr. Rovelius emphasized that contextualizing misrepresentation involves asking questions about how these misrepresentations began and became accepted. First, power and power relations must be examined. Who creates these images? Who creates these narrative stories about indigenous peoples? Who has the power to talk about indigenous peoples? Usually, these are those who are in possession of privilege. Thus, often indigenous peoples are excluded from creating their own representations. Second, the speaker pointed out the ideas of, or ideologies to support the creation of misrepresentations. For instance, social Darwinism as the dominant paradigm during the colonial times dictated that indigenous peoples were at the bottom of the social-cultural hierarchy due to their perceived difference from an inferiority to Western cultures. Presenting indigenous people as backward also served the purpose of the colonial civilizing project in order for the colonizers to subjugate and control them. These misrepresentations also served to justify the act of the colonizers to civilize the people that they portrayed as backward savages. During colonialization, a time of anxiety in the West misrepresenting the colonized people as being inferior, the colonizers also served to reinforce the Western or European colonizers' sense of superiority. Third, Dr. Rovelius argued that after the period of colonization, this narrative of misrepresentation continued through the creation of the Philippines as a nation state. As nationalism and nationhood gained prominence, the idea of Filipinos still did not include indigenous people such as the Igorot. The Filipino, in the early days of imaging the nation state, was modern and modernizing. According to Ilustrado propagandistas and even great thinkers such as Jose Rizal, Carlos P. Romulo, this did not include the indigenous peoples who were still seen even as backward, uncivilized, and superstitious, not rational and scientific. With the creation of the nation state, the state sought instead to assimilate these indigenous peoples in the context of national culture. However, Dr. Rovelius illustrated that indigenous peoples are not always victims. Against this narrative of misrepresentation and assimilation, there are also narratives of resistance and human agency of Igorots themselves. These range from smaller items such as the Igorotak T-shirt to bigger arenas of misrepresentation, such as Igorots representing themselves in art, film, protests, sports, and activities in the diaspora. In conclusion, the speaker posed these points for the understanding of self-representation. First, representation is not monolithic. These are many representations of being Igorot. This is no one singular representation of being so. Second, representation also needs to acknowledge that hybridity exists. That is, Igorot culture and identity interact with various cultures, and that interaction may enlarge or modify cultural representation. Third, he asked, do indigenous peoples themselves self-exoticize? In this sense, do indigenous peoples themselves tend to rely on stereotypes as they represent themselves? Lastly, he inquired on who can write or speak for the indigenous. Does, does being an indigenous person automatically guarantee that he or she will write and speak for and on behalf of the indigenous? These are ongoing questions that have to be debated and discussed. The speaker highlighted that debates on representation and identity are welcome and most must continue because these indicate a dynamic culture. To continue, to continue the conversation in our webinar series on IP rights, culture, and arts innovation and autonomy, we have here today our second speaker, another resource speaker who will discuss on cultural cultural appropriation. We have Dr. Stanley Anongos. Dr. Stanley Anongos is the current director of Extension Services of Benguet State University. He is an associate professor at the Department of Social Sciences, College of Arts and Sciences of the same university. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Social Sciences degree major in History and Psychology from the University of the Philippines, Baguio, a Master of Arts in Social Sciences from Benguet State University, and a PhD in History from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. His research interests are in the field of material culture, food as culture, cultural dances and higher education, suicide and commercial agriculture, as well as local and institutional history. He is professionally affiliated with the Cordillera Indigenous Peoples Historical Society and the Philippine National Historical Association. He has served as advisor, panel member, evaluator, and resource speaker for social science research at BSU and other state universities and colleges in the Cordillera. Dr. Anongos has been engaged in the development and promotion of the culture and the arts landscape of BSU. He started as organizer of the BSU Historical Museum in 2010 and later moving on as head of the museum from 2011. He subsequently became the director of the Center for Culture and the Arts from 2016 to 2018. He has always been involved in extension services that have encouraged a multi-sectoral interaction in the areas of indigenous knowledge and political structure in the Cordillera. He was a facilitator of indigenous knowledge system and practices, as well as ethnicity and cultural solidarity with the BSU Open University from 2016 to 2020 and 2019, respectively. He organized the Regional Indigenous Knowledge Forum and Workshop in December 2012 and the Regional Forum on Car Autonomy in Retrospect, Reasons, Lessons, and Response in October 2010. Here to discuss cultural appropriation, the second topic in our webinar series, please welcome Dr. Stanley Anongos Jr. Sir.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ryan,
Good morning, sir.
for the introduction. I'd like to greet everyone a happy Indigenous month. Okay. What of course Ryan did not mention is that I am from Bontok. No? So I'm in Takung IP. No? I was born there. I was raised there. Although I was educated somewhere else, like many of us. So my generation is a generation of a cultural change, social changes in our region. So you could expect that I am a result of that transition. So therefore, many of what I know about our culture could actually be the result of cultural appropriation that we are going to talk about today. I'd like to begin by showing you this picture. Many of you probably have eaten in this restaurant found at SM. Uh, so in front of that restaurant, you can see two figures there, actually big figures that would be understood within the Ifugao culture as bulul. No? I do not understand, of course, the reason for placing these two figures in front of the restaurant. But I presume by their position, they are meant to welcome patrons. If you look at the figures with their arms crossed and their faces dim, I do not think that is very welcoming at all. No? So that is an example of cultural appropriation. In fact, in Baguio City, there is a growing number of restaurants using material cultures from the Cordillera. Okay? So try to be conscious about this when you go to restaurants. In fact, inside this restaurant, you can find more materials from the Cordillera displayed. And you go to other restaurants around Baguio, some even have their own museum, like the Dapayan, for example, in La Trinidad. Let me go to another example. This is a performance in Davao City, where we participated as an SUC. Kindly play that, Marlo. This is one of the contest piece now entered into the PASOK sponsored cultural competitions. So these competitions are attended by the SUCs, state universities and colleges. So Benguet State University has been participating in these kinds of competitions. This particular dance, which is labeled by the author as Uyaoy dance, Uyaoy dance was performed by several schools, and this is the winner in that category. The Uyawi dance was choreographed and authored by Ramon Ubusan. Mukhang ayaw, ano? Yeah, okay. So, well, you have to admit that that was one graceful performance. But you have to wait until an Ifuga would actually react on that kind of dance. So this is again another example of appropriation in dance. Okay, in Cordillera dances, we imagine Ramon Ubusan, okay, perhaps coming to the Cordillera in the 1970s, participated in these kinds of activities, interviewed people, observed dances in Ifugao and parts of the Cordillera. And then he notated this. And then he rewrote, okay, these dances, okay, and made it his own. Okay? That is the essence of cultural appropriation. No, he took somebody else's dance, okay, and then reinterpreted it, okay, and then made it his own to be shown, okay, to be used and performed by other people than the Ifugaos or the Igorots. Okay. Uh, literature, literature would define cultural appropriation as taking, no? Taking from. So appropriation is simply defined as taking from another elements of culture, okay, that are not your own. Okay, that is the basic definition of cultural appropriation. So it means, okay, that somebody else, a stranger, comes around, okay, take part of our culture, okay, and make that particular element of our culture as his or her own. That's cultural appropriation. What can be taken, no, from us? What can be taken from a culture like our culture? Okay, it actually includes a lot of things. As you can see there, our arts could be taken, our history, our ideas, even our expressions, material, culture, symbols, songs, stories, even our identities can actually be taken, our knowledge, religion, science, okay? And of course, dances. For all you know, Cordillera dances have been appropriated a very long time ago already, starting of course from those fairs sponsored by colonizers, like in the Madrid Exposition and the St. Louis Fair. But the notation of our dances, the notation is the act of putting this into detailed steps so that it could be followed and taught using the notated steps. The notation of many of the Cordillera dances was done as early as the late 1920s by Francisca Reyes Aquino, okay? Another multi-awarded author like Ramon Ubusan was also a multi-awarded choreographer and artist. So Francisca Reyes Aquino collected and included some of our dances in what would be categorized as folk dances. So our dances became folk, okay? Dances with specific uniform standard steps to be followed based on the notations that were made by the author. So the works of Francisca Reyes Aquino, in fact, continues to be used today, until today. Okay? Still in dances, other fields also appropriated our dances, particularly in the field of ballet. So I do not know if you have heard, for example, of Agnes Loxin's Igorot, the rendition of a ballet, okay, that is patterned from Igorot attires and Igorot movements. This actually earned a lot of accolades in the field of ballet, and Agnes Loxin actually also was awarded for this creation of the Igorot ballet dance or dance movements, or Igorot inspired ballet movement. And then there was, of course, Sarit Bahag by Jojo Lucila, where, like the Igorot early on, also followed used, okay, Igorot attires, okay, as you can see in the picture, and some Igorot movements, and then merged it with the ballet movements. And again, like Agnes Loxin ahead of him, he was also awarded for these kinds of performances, or that of the Angel of the Morning by Novi Bereber, no? Same platform na ballet, okay, and same use of these kinds of Cordillera attires and some movements. Um, So you will see that in all of the taking, that we are talking, because these were taken from our culture, okay, and then brought somewhere else. Okay? Appropriation means also that the taker, the stranger who took these cultural elements of ours, would put a different meaning to it. Okay, these strangers would redefine, okay, these aspects of our culture into their own. No, say they come with their own frame of mind, okay, and then get this from the Cordillera, and then place it in the frame in order to make choreographies like this one. So as you can see, there is a connection between representation and appropriation, okay? Because appropriations, okay, are actually representations, except that these are representations by cultural outsiders, okay, not from the inside. You must have heard of this. I'm sure you did not watch this. Uh, but these are some movies that became controversial because precisely with the accusation of cultural appropriation. The Igorota, for example, particularly became uh, interesting and controversial because of the nakedness that came with the Igorota. Uh, Same with the Banawi talks about violence, no, revenge, and all those things. And even your Mumbaki featuring the concept of the Ifugao Mumbaki. You see, what was taken in movies like this? No, there were no particular object that were taken in these movies. Instead, the ideas uh, within the movie, okay, were actually taken from the Cordillera, from our culture. That is the taking, that is the appropriation. They took these ideas, incorporated this into their movies, okay, and present them as is. So it is their interpretation or reinterpretation of what we are. Okay? Um, of course, you ask the question, why in the first place would outsiders take cultural elements from others? Okay? So it's a question of the motive why outsiders had to take parts of our culture. And there are varied reasons here. It could be aesthetics, no? As in the case of artists, okay? As in the case of museums, okay? Or collectors, okay? It could be commercial, which is probably the worst kind of cultural appropriation, because um, people take in order to earn from what they take, and usually at the expense of the culture where the element was taken. Uh, for academic reasons, actually, this is one of the more common kinds of cultural appropriation. Uh, Researches that have been conducted in the Cordillera, especially by non-Cordillerans, are actually forms of cultural appropriation. Okay? And, like Agnes Locsin, like Ramon Ubusan, a lot of these researches were actually awarded, multi-awarded. Okay? So many authors were well awarded for cultural appropriation. Okay? So they got promoted for that particular endeavor, or even political. Okay? So these are the basic reasons why outsiders would take, okay, from our culture. I keep talking about outsiders here, so I guess there is a need really to clarify this. Cultural appropriation, by definition, really requires that there should be a difference between the taker and the people or the culture where elements of culture were taken from. So there's always that uh, element of insider and outsider. In the Cordillera, for example, sino ba ang outsider, sino ang insider, which is actually very, very difficult also to do. The debate about who is an Igorot had been there over time, and it was never resolved. Okay, but although defining who are insiders and who are its outsiders is a very difficult task for purposes of understanding cultural appropriation, we can actually define ourselves as Igorots, as Cordillerans. For example, I would see origin, no, as one criteria for that, or lineage, okay, or descent. Si Ryan, for example, is an insider, an Igorot, because his parents and grandparents are Igorots, okay? And he came from a place of Igorot territory, something like that. And finally, of course, aside from those, to be classified as one, you have to adhere, no, to certain core cultural practices that would define a particular group. No? So pwede tayong umikot doon, no, as to who are insiders, okay? Just so we would be able to identify who are doing appropriation and who are not. Okay? Also, the idea of insider and outsider is also defined in the context of power relations. Cultural appropriation also means, okay, that the relation between the taker and the person who was taken from, the element was taken from, is actually a relation of power. No? So that cultural appropriation looks at a relation where one culture is dominant over another. Okay, so there is inequality in the cultural positioning here. Of course, what makes one a dominant culture and what makes one a weaker culture is also debatable. But I mean, you have to go back to lessons in history in the Cordillera to be able to establish, okay, the formation of these kinds of unequal relations. Sir Chansey last time already talked about part of history, and it is still there where we can actually understand the meaning of cultural inequalities that were formed by historical processes. Binanggit na niya, for example, that during the Spanish period, the Igorots were described as salvajes, no? Savages, of backward, rebels, no? Dirty, okay, uncivilized. Okay? So, and then these descriptions made by the Spaniards were instilled in many lowland communities, and they started to believe these kinds of descriptions of their neighbors, no, of the Igorots. That is an experience of a historical differentiation. We have been differentiated. We have been treated, okay, and not just as a different cultural group, but as an inferior cultural group. The coming of the Americans did not actually change that much. In fact, in a way, the Americans reinforced the difference. So, for example, the Americans labeled Igorots as non-Christians, okay, which connotes a lot of things. No? To be non-Christian, at that time, it means backward. Okay? It means uncivilized. Okay? The Americans even created the special province for the Igorots. That is now the mountain province in 1909. Okay, so all these acts are acts of, making a particular group special. No? Special not in the sense of being special, but special in some other way. Okay, and then in the post-colonial period, okay, the non-Christians continued to be seen as a different group of people and was even given the name of a cultural or national minority. Okay? The minority term perhaps doesn't only mean the number, okay? But minority could also mean, okay, that our cultural identities are insignificant, being a minority. Okay, so remember that is why they have to create the CNI, Commission on Natural Integration, yon, in order to specially take charge of the national minorities. And then later, the NCI turned into Panamin, if you remember. And in all of this, Igorots were treated, okay, I would be allowed to say, as a second-class citizen, in the Philippines. I remember Sir R.R. talking about Marcos saying, in the context of the Chico River Dam, Marcos saying that you have to sacrifice because that's for the bigger population. Okay, so in a sense, as minorities, our needs also became secondary. In fact, if we became important, that's because we can provide a rich natural resources for the state or for the government. Okay, until we became what we are, as labeled as indigenous people. Okay, so being indigenous people, as defined, actually traces an experience of historical differentiation. Okay, so we are different, and in the course of this differentiation, we have always been discriminated, treated, okay, as a weaker culture. So there is really a dominant culture, okay, and we are the weaker culture. Okay, so it is in that kind of power relations that cultural appropriation would happen. We see the dominating culture taking, okay, from the weaker culture. Okay, that is cultural appropriation. So power is an important element of our definition here. In other words, Ilocanos cannot complain of cultural appropriation against us, but we can against them, okay? Because of that particular nature of cultural appropriation, there has to be a difference in terms of power. Okay? These images that you see in this slide, of course, you have Nardas. We know all Nardas is, in fact, Ryan is. Anong konseyo? Okay. Oh. Apo pala si Ryan dito. Kaya pala naging model din ng Nardas crafts. Okay, of course, we have Easter weaving, okay, that had been producing products that are based on Cordillera or Igorot designs. And then you have at the center is the Vinta Gallery. As I am reading through cultural appropriation, I realized that Vinta Gallery had been attacked, okay, for cultural appropriation. Vinta Gallery is owned by a Filipino based in Canada, and recently it accommodated Ifugao patterns, Ifugao designs in its clothing. Okay? And then it got the attention of some individuals, and they accused Vinta Gallery for cultural appropriation. So Vinta Gallery had to go to the extent of explaining, countering, justifying why they have to their inclusion of Ifugao designs, okay, in their clothing. But my point here is, why would Vinta Gallery go to the extent of justifying its use of an Ifugao design, okay? And Nardas and Easter weaving do not have to. No? So the basic difference is, of course, the concept of insider and outsider, because Vinta is an outsider. No? It so happens, so it has to face these kinds of accusations, while Easter and Nardas are insiders. They are insiders. Something that is therefore a little difficult to accuse of cultural appropriation. Okay. The cultural appropriation in the history of the Cordillera, again, is not recent. It is not recent. So I'm looking at cultural appropriation in history, and I'd like to go all the way back to the Spanish period. Yung Madrid exposition, the first picture on the left is a picture taken at the Madrid exposition in Spain, where a number of Igorots were taken there, and they were exhibited with animals and plants. It's practically a zoo. They say that that was a zoo. And the Igorots were part of that, okay? And they were made to perform certain rituals and dances for the exposition. And then you have, of course, the St. Louis Fair, which by now probably is already very popular to us. And indeed, we have to make ourselves conscious about this St. Louis Fair, because in here, the Americans brought Filipinos, including Igorots, in this fair, and they were made again to dance. They were supplied with dogs so that they can butcher them almost every day. Okay, so you see, what the colonizers did was to take these people out of their villages and brought them to the foreign land. Okay, so it's not just the people that were taken. Together with these people are their attires, no, their ideas, their practices, okay, their dances, their memories, okay, are brought with them into this foreign land. Yeah. So that is appropriation. No? So ang tagal ng history ng appropriations dito sa Cordillera. And then of course you have Wurster. No? Wurster is Dean Wurster, who became a commissioner in the Philippine Commission and headed the Department of Interior, or Secretary of Interior, which is in charge of the non-Christians during the early American period. And Wurster would go around the Cordillera sponsoring a kanyao, where he would compel people to join with their gongs, okay, with their attires, with their wine, okay, and with everything, with all other accessories to make the kanyao more colorful. Okay, so Wurster's kanyao is also a form of appropriation. Okay, first and foremost, probably it is one of the first instances where dances, okay, and all other things have been decontextualized by a colonizer. Okay, aside from that, Wurster confronts us with another form cultural appropriation. This one is a picture. On the left is a picture of Wurster, okay? The big man there. And then on the right is a performance in one of the kanyaos that I was talking about. But Wurster is also known, especially today, because of the numerous photographs that he took, okay, from the Cordillera. Photography and photography and cultural appropriations. So in case you're thinking, what about photography? Is it considered as an appropriation? The answer is yes. Okay. Because taking photography is not something really neutral. Now, once you take a picture, you already attach meaning to it. And as a photographer, okay, you actually have power over these images that you take. Let's look at Wurster, for example. I took these pictures from Mark Rice, who did a very good analysis of Wurster's pictures. The first picture that you see there is an old man carrying part of a head, okay? Part of a head. And then, of course, I do not have to describe the middle picture there. And the last one is an egret standing on the side of a head. Okay. What is wrong with these pictures? By the way, Wurster collected around 15,000 pictures all in all, no? And around 2 miles of video footages about indigenous peoples in the Cordillera. So the point of appropriation here is how Wurster actually made use of these pictures for an end, for a political end. For example, by 1913 to 1914, at that time when Democrats were taking over the Philippines, and there was a plan to actually grant independence to the Philippines, Wurster was one of those who was in the forefront of resisting, okay, that Philippine independence. And what Wurster did is went around the world in the US, okay, to actually show the Americans, okay, that the Filipinos are not ready for independence precisely because of the presence of egrets. And Wurster would use these photos to prove that. So the message of Wurster in all of these pictures is, these are the future leaders of the Philippines. Naked, headhunters, backward. Ang title niya nga dun sa merong head, okay? Future senator. No? It's really pregnant with an agenda. No? So Wurster was against Philippine independence, and he used his numerous photos in order to wage a campaign against the independence. But what is interesting here is, of course, how Mark Rice, the author of the book on Wurster's Fantasy Island, would now look at this. And Mark Rice would claim that in the first picture, that is not a real head. Okay? And Mark Rice would say that is actually a paper mache. Okay? But Wurster did not say that, of course, in the presentations. Okay? So what do people get out of these kinds of images? It's what Wurster wants to present. Okay? The last picture there, Mark Rice would say, this seems to be staged. Okay? It is a staged photo. Okay? In other words, whatever group, okay, that Wurster took this photo from, they did not actually do this. No, it was Mark Rice would suspect that Wurster actually staged the shooting of this photo. Okay? And of course, the middle one, so the nakedness of it all. So Wurster was trying to use, okay, his pictures, okay, in order to represent a people, okay, and then with agendas in doing so. The next kind of cultural appropriations that happen in our history is, of course, the practice of ethnography, or it may not be called an ethnography, but in researches that foreigners or Americans particularly did in the Cordillera. If you look at works on the Cordillera, you might be surprised to find that majority of these works were actually conducted by Americans, no, foreigners. Let me just give you example of this one. Sa Tingyan, si Faye Cooper Cole, no. But I'd like to add into the researcher status here, because these researchers also became collectors of objects. They became collectors of material culture. For example, si Faye Cooper Cole, while he did his study in Abra, he also collected a lot of material culture, and then brought it to Field Museum. And you can see in the picture part of those that Cole probably took from Abra. Of course, you have Albert Jenks, who did a study on the Bontoc Igorot in the early years of the 1900s. And he came up with a very thick book about the Bontocs. But again, aside from doing the study on the Bontocs, he also took materials out of the area. Okay, and then I think he sold it to an American Museum of Natural History in New York. The point here is researchers, okay, or research or academic research is actually one of the perpetrators of cultural okay, appropriation. Okay, because it is in these books where we see what we are, who we are, who we were. Okay, they described us. Okay, this is the kind of rituals that the Igorots did. This is the kind of belief that the Bontocs had. This is the kind of houses that they had. We were being described by an outsider, and that is cultural appropriation. And so many other studies like, Claude Moss, Nabaloy songs for Benguet, of course, the Harold Conklin of Ifugao, and then Bayer, of course, also of Ifugao. Okay, so all of these, okay, were part of these groups of academics, ethnographers who have taken from the Cordillera and represented us in their books. Fast track na tayo sa present period. In fact, the researches being done continue. The kind of authors who continue to do research about the Cordillera remain in the hands of outsiders. So these are just examples in recent works like those of Lawrence Reed about the Bontoc and Ginaang, where I come from. You have, of course, William Scott, who did this and many other works. And of course, yung recent kay Gerard Finin, who in a way defined what it is to be Igorot. How did we become Igorots? It's a continuing process. I mean, you go to any library, you go to any collections of Cordillera ethnography, and you will be surprised that a lot of these writers are actually outsiders. Okay? Okay. Today, cultural appropriations continue to happen also in the field of arts. Okay? Uh, these are random selections, like you have then Senator Legarda wearing the Ifugao Pangalapang. And then I took a picture of one of the waiters at the Solibao restaurant also wearing a Pangalapang. Okay? It's actually everywhere. Okay? Okay? Uh, Tourism, okay, is a very rich area for cultural appropriation. All you have to do is watch festivals, and you could actually witness forms of appropriations in the process. Our cultural festivals, for all you know, have been ruled by choreographers, eh, who are paid, by the way, with very handsome remunerations. And they are very, very assertive in doing choreography for these dances, to the point that they would even actually dictate how attires would be used, like this that you see in the picture. Okay? I don't know if you have seen, for example, booths, small booths at Burnham, at dito na sa Wright Park, dun sa highest point, yung former highest point sa Halsema, I have seen booths loaning attires for tourists to actually use. And you know what? Most of these are not insiders. Most of these are outsiders. So what do you expect? There's always a misrepresentation in the use of these attires peddled by these groups. So tourism is an important context in cultural appropriation, especially in cultural festivals. Not only have they brought rituals out of context, but even the use of so many other things have become actually very, very different. This one, what can you say? No? There is no doubt, igorot na igorota itong first picture. But is she? No? I mean, the point is by all those colors and designs, you know that is an igorot. Sometimes we are defined by that. We cannot be igorots if we are not in our suit or in barong. We are not igorots if we are in our uniform or in casual attire. We are igorots because we have the color, we have the designs in us. So that whenever we talk about who are the igorots, they have to have these kinds of images. In fact, in books, both elementary and high school, pag sinabing igorot, it cannot be a neutral presentation of an igorot in his casual attire. It's always with the colors like that. But if you can see the first picture, diba? If you're familiar with differences, you see that's a combination of Ifugao and Kalinga and some other things there. Even the headdress, talaga bang headdress? Headdress supposedly yun. Ifugao headdress yung nasa kamay niya. But parang accessory na lang siya. Of course, the second picture is actually a product of the vintage gallery that I was talking about a while ago. In fact, if you go to their page, you would see a lot, various kinds of clothing that they designed out of igorot designs. Okay, you know, it's very, very difficult to actually confront cultural appropriation in the field of arts. Okay, in the field of arts, artists always have that defense of, you know, expression. Okay. uh, yes, it's an expression. When I was in college, I got shocked by the college dancers wearing a very short or wearing a miniskirt, whose design, which is actually based on the putad. No, it's a bontok funerary cloth. Okay, and we got shocked. Okay, and we have to get their attention. We have to criticize them, and they just said, "It's it's art. Come on, no." And we can say anything. This is the usual justification used by those who can actually appropriate. This is also a continuing business, antique business. You find it everywhere. This one I took from one of the antique shops in Maharlika. Okay? So this is another context where we experience a lot of misrepresentations. No, again, in antique business, the antique dealers now take these objects, put their own meaning, and then sell it to patrons, and then the patrons will also assume another set of meanings into these artifacts. Okay, so by the time that you go to their museum, you might find it very different from your own understanding of these artifacts. Illustrators, no? If you go to the internet, you click in this, there are a lot of art products like this. Okay, but you see how they, of course, represent Igorots. Okay. It's always with tattoo, okay, and naked, the nakedness of these kinds of representations. Museums. This is from the Bangkok Museum, where it is full of Ifugao bululs. Okay. Again, I don't know how you experience a museum visit, especially if what is being exhibited is your own material culture. Okay, it's a bit different, no? Because these objects, which are now defined in museums or artifacts, were taken, from particular origins or contexts, and then brought to the museum and curated by probably an outsider. Okay, it develops a different meaning in the process. So they are just object of viewing. No, they don't represent functions. They don't represent values anymore as they are or they were in their origins. Okay, so what then? Okay, ito natuwa si Ryan dito because I read that Ryan and Sipsy, of course, did something about this particular sandal, no? From a company, the Tribu, no? Tribu company. But let us look at this in the context of how we look at cultural appropriation. How do you take all of this? So the images that I showed you, the experiences that I showed you, how do you take all of this? Okay, how do we judge this? There are two camps, no? Some would say that by its nature, cultural appropriation is already harmful. Ganon, no? By its nature, cultural appropriation, any form of cultural appropriation is by itself already harmful. Some argue that it is because it silences the owners. Okay? It silences the owners. Somebody else will have to do it for them. Somebody else will have to write their culture. Okay? Somebody else will have to speak for them. Somebody else will have to present these artifacts for them. Okay? In the process, there is a silencing that is happening. Meaning to say, okay, we are not doing it ourselves. Okay? When we're supposed to. Okay? So yun ang isang camp doon. But that's rather a very extreme position to take. Okay, so instead, the other perspective here is you look at cultural appropriation according to its effects on the people. Okay, so whether, for example, is it tolerable? Okay, so there's a debate of whether an appropriation is tolerable or offensive. So if it is offensive, then it is wrong. So we look at the morality of cultural appropriation here, whether it's wrong or right. So in this particular perspective, there are cultural appropriations that could be neutral, no? They could be tolerated, while there are cultural appropriations that are offensive. And so let's look at the tribu sandal here. Ryan will tell his story siguro later about how he contacted the company here. But my point is, why did this kind of naming invited or attracted flags, no? Or criticisms, okay? If it would have been a cup, no? And not a sandal, would we have reacted similarly as we did? No? So yung offense to us. Why is this sandal offensive? And if it's a cup, would it be as offensive as it would be with these sandals? Okay? So yung experience ng offense actually again is deep-rooted. Okay? It's deep-rooted. Why would we go against this kind of naming for a sandal? Okay? Because experience of discrimination. Yung representation kasi na inaapakan ka. Yung ganon. Sandal ka lang. Inaapakan ka. Okay? So, ganon tayo ka-sensitive because our sensibilities are formed, okay, by our experience of prejudices and discrimination. And we are very quick to take positions against these kinds. Okay? So if this would have been a t-shirt, okay, I'm sure it would be a welcome brand, no? But this one, for a sandal, it's different. Okay, so yung offense, okay, whether the people, the insiders are offended would define cultural appropriation. Okay, if it's just a t-shirt, that's probably tolerable. Okay, so our considerations, aside from being offensive, is of course, did the party who appropriated our elements of culture consulted people? My process ba of consultation, did they get consent from the people that I'm going to take this and use this as this? It's very, very, very important to consider. In fact, many definitions of appropriation include yung concept ng consent. Okay? So if it was taken without permission, it's already cultural appropriation. If it was taken with consent, okay, it could be tolerated. Okay? The worst, as I've said, is on commoditization. When outsiders take our cultural elements and make it into business and they earn from it, that is probably one of the the worst kind of appropriation, because people earn by our culture, earn by appropriating our culture, and that is usually a sign of a cultural appropriation that is offensive. Okay, so in relation to that, of course, look at the benefit of the appropriation to the people and culture. Yung appropriation ba, did it encourage understanding of our culture? Okay. Does it support cultural relativity, for example? Okay. If it does, I think, okay, those are tolerable kind of cultural appropriations. Or baka yung cultural appropriation perpetrates stereotypes. Okay, maybe it perpetrates stereotypes. So if you look at igorots and nakedness, for example, yung picture na pinakita ko kanina, for example, this one, okay, If you look at that one, why would you have, when you describe an Igorot lady, why is it nakailangang nakahubad? No? This is a stereotype. So if cultural appropriations feed into these stereotypes, then it makes it all wrong. Yeah. Also, does it intensify distortions of our culture? Then if it does, if it continues to distort the understanding of our culture, okay, then it is, okay, a very harmful kind of cultural appropriation. This is and many other things actually. So given this, diba? Given these guides, we take these cultural appropriations and decide whether they are harmful cultural appropriations, or other authors would now call it cultural misappropriation, to distinguish from an appropriation that is neutral, that is not damaging, that is not harmful. Okay, these are guides by which we could probably look at them. Okay. So I'm going back to many authors, for instance. I cited a lot of works: Scott, Lawrence Reed, Jenks, Finin, okay, and many foreign authors or non-Cordillera authors who wrote about Cordillera. Okay, how, if we read this, okay, did they, are they, would you judge them as the harmful kind of appropriation? I think not. In fairness, wala naman yatang literature that is criticized to be harmful to the Igorot or the Cordilleras. In fact, most of these works are actually very scholarly, and they have been very helpful in understanding, no, the people in the Cordillera as well as their culture. Si Sir R.R. nga, no? Sabi niya, Tagalog siya. Although we know that he actually authored a lot of works on the Cordillera. And I do not think that Chansey R.R. ever came up with a work, okay, that or promoted anything against the Igorots. Okay, so yung description sa kanya last time as being Cordilleran by heart or Igorot by heart could be apt, could be appropriate. Okay, so there are a lot of outsiders who do cultural appropriation, but their works were not harmful to the people or to the culture. This is a picture of Harold Conklin in one of his interviews, interaction with an Ifugao. And I'm showing this just to tell you that despite all these negative connotations of cultural appropriation, researchers like Harold Conklin have actually done researches in very rigorous ways. And also to tell you that yung cultural appropriation is not really one way. In many cases, it's actually a two-way interaction. Okay? When antique dealers went to communities in the Cordillera, they did not just take the antiques. The people actually sold it to them. Okay? There were negotiations that happened. When authors come up with their work, they have to go to the field, talk with people, listen to voices, even discordant voices. Okay? So I hope that with that you see that cultural appropriation by itself is not negative. Now, the point that I am driving here is that there are appropriations that are bad and that are good. Okay, and in fairness to the Cordillera, many of the appropriations in the field of academics are good, no? Kinds of appropriations. You probably have seen this. Vice President Robredo was criticized by a lawyer and accused of cultural appropriation for wearing a funerary attire. No? And then a group of Ifugaos called Ifugao Nation actually responded to that accusation. And they say, yes, the VP is wearing our fabric. And no, it's not funerary. And they would continue, many Ifugao weavers are recipients of the VP's Angat Buhay program. And she effectively helps in promoting our products. Okay? Hagio, VP Lenny. So these kinds of interactions that happen, no? Also come with benefits. This is what I was talking about. What do this cultural appropriation bring to the people? Okay, and one of these kind is brought about is articulated by the Ifugao Nation. And so the Bontoks would say, "Yang good kay, what then?" Part of that talk kasi na binigay sa amin na what would we do with cultural appropriation? What would we do now? Okay? Yang good kay. There are a lot actually of ways that we could do, but I'm coming from my experience, no, in cultural appropriation. One, for example, that we can, a very simple way to combat appropriation is to be part of that audience that are critical to all of this. Okay? We are just audience, but we should be critical. You see this photo on the right side. I took this actually from Manong Mike Umaming's Facebook page. This is one of the paintings exhibited at SM, and it was criticized by some netizens. Okay, but these people who criticized the paintings were also criticized, okay, by others, no, defending that, hey, it's just a work of art. Okay, stop being very sensitive. But I would say that this is what we need. Okay, in as much as cultural appropriation is everywhere, it's public, it's very visible, we should not stop being critical. Post if you post. It's okay. I mean, why would people get offended by this kind of painting? Again, it's deep-rooted. Perhaps it's something to do, for example, with igorots and dog eating. A history of stereotyping like that. Okay, of igorots and their state as people. Okay, yung mga ganong experiences would have helped some people to look at this particular painting as offensive. Okay? Sina Manong Mike at si Rocky ata pumunta dun sa author. They actually talked to the author, and of course the author said, it's just a piece of work. I did not mean any harm to the igorots. No, that has always been, of course, the position of artists. But the point that I'm driving at is, hello, come on, be critical. Okay, be critical. Let cultural appropriators be responsible for what they do. Let them answer for what they do. Okay? We need the critical audience in cultural appropriation. Another one is establish or support community museums. I'm coming from a I'm coming from my experience in terms of material culture here. Anyway, the general position, the general point here is that artifacts, uh, ethnic artifacts continue to move out of the community, either to the antique shops or to the museums. Ganon. So, why not establish community museums? Okay? In Kabayan, well, aside from the National Museum in Kabayan, the Camora National High School, for example, established its own museum, and there are private museums also in Kabayan. DepEd might like to support these projects, no? Because when we talk of community museums, probably the most logical places for these museums would be schools. Okay, so you might like to support that kind of projects. I mean, we don't have to go outside. We don't have to go outside and learn about ourselves through other museums. Okay, we can curate our own museums. Also, this one, I'm talking about the codifying dances, if it's possible. I'll go back to my story about the Uya-Uy dance of Ramon Ubusan. We actually complained here. No, we complained. We lost. And the basis for our disqualification is that because we included females in the dance. We included females, which is what we do. No? But we were disqualified because the Ramon Ubusan Uya-Uy dance doesn't include female. We complained, no? We complained about this, and they would just tell us, why don't you come up with your own notated work, which is a challenge actually to us. Kasama ko dito yung ibang IFSU, ay yung ibang state use, no? Ang IFSU, ang ASC, ang KSU, ang MPSPC, ang ASIS. Kasama namin sila dito. And in our small ways, we are trying to come up with this. No? And then, of course, very important that we do our own research. We document our own culture. It's very, very important. And when we do that, we have to do it with rigor naman. We always accuse outsiders of writing about our culture. And yet, when we do the same research, hindi naman natin inaayos. We have to also improve on that area. I don't know why NCIP is, but I think because NCIP is a very important office in all of these activities, its mandate really to protect these forms of cultural appropriations, and NCIP should really stand, as a model for all of these kinds of support or of representing Igorot culture. O sige, ang dami kong sinasabi pero okay na yun. Let others talk na. Pati na yung story ni Ryan. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Another very informative presentation by Dr. Anongos. So remind ko lang before we go to the open forum, for the participants in the Zoom and Facebook participants, there is a evaluation form for this topic, for this webinar. The link, I think, will be sent. And certificates of participation will be given to those who attended at least 3 webinars. 3 of because we have 4 webinars. Those who have attended 3 will be the ones given certificates of participation. And of course, we also would like to acknowledge the presence of via Zoom, our partners in the SIPC, Brigadier General Lawrence Mina, of the Commanding General of the 5th Infantry Division, and Brigadier General Henry Doyawan, the Brigade Commander of the 503rd IB. We thank also General Doyawan for transporting. We've been distributing face masks and face shields to public school teachers And sina General Duyawan ang nagdala for Mountain Province, Ifugao, and Apayao. Thank you very much. So let's move forward. So to the to the open forum. We have questions, sir, sent by our participants through Zoom. The first one is, how do we address cultural misappropriation done in other regions, such as the wrong portrayal of Igrots in textbooks used in Cebu? Will we answer this or it's okay? Okay, sige. Si Dr. Anongos. How do we address cultural misappropriation done in other regions, such as the wrong portrayal of Igrots? Pinisent po kasi ni Sir RR last time.
I think this kind of issue came about last time. It's difficult now because yung production ng books kasi may mga politics din yan. Okay? But I'm thinking like these authors should be doing their own researches. Okay, but I guess on our part, maybe we make public about we make accessible those researches done on the Cordillera. Okay, but it's of course a challenge whether DepEd authors would really read all of this. Okay, yun naman ang pwede natin gawin. I mean, can we go to the extent of coming up with a law penalizing these kinds of acts? I guess it's the responsibility of authors to actually verify what they write on books.
Yeah.
Ethics yun.
Yun nga po yung
sinasabi
namin last time. Wala po kayang proofreading by DepEd before it goes to the printing. Anyway, we ask, is there anyone from DepEd sa ating Zoom? Wala. Yeah, from DepEd. Anyway, next week on the fourth webinar forum, we will try to invite one from DepEd. Kasi ang dami nating questions on these ones, the publication of wrong information on Igrots sa textbooks. Critical ito kasi, sir, because of course ang gumagamit dito are our elementary. Yun. So yes po. Okay, so next from Ms. Roda. When a musician from outside the Cordillera rearranges the lyrics of Cordilleran songs, changes the pronunciation of words when singing, and claims these songs as her remake or cover songs, is this a case of cultural appropriation or misrepresentation?
Based on our definition, okay, pasok lahat, outsider, okay, changing meanings, remaking, and owning these songs. These are very clear indications of cultural appropriation or cultural misappropriation. But again, it's how we take this. Okay, like I said, does it distort? Okay, part of our culture? Does it reinforce stereotypes against us? Okay, then that really makes it misappropriation. If it does not, okay, then probably that's one of those that we always I was talking about as tolerable kind of appropriations.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have someone from DPWH CAR via Zoom to ask a question.
Sir, good morning.
Please identify yourself, sir, ma'am.
Lex Paderes from the
DPWH CAR.
First, we wish to thank the resource person for giving us a very educational information about our culture in the Cordillera, sir. First,
sir, saglit lang po, hindi namin marinig. Wait.
Oh, is audio already okay, sir?
Okay na po.
Sir, before we will raise our question, we wish to thank the resource person for giving us a very comprehensive discussion about our culture in the Cordillera. Sir, things evolve over time, and so is culture. And if I remember, you mentioned something about the creation of a hybrid culture. Now, sir, we wish to know what are the culture or our practices that must be sustained in its original form, and ano ba yung mga area where changes can be accepted. We must have to put a threshold, sir. Kasi whether we like it or not, changes will always be in us. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you from DPWH. Wow, that's actually true. I'm not here to tell you about cultural preservation. There's a lot of debate about cultural preservation. Can we actually preserve culture? When culture by itself is actually adjusting, culture by itself is dynamic. So as they define it in books, no, it's always changing. So if you ask me what to retain or what not, whatever is functional in our modern situation, okay, could be retained. If traditions, for example, may be used in order to support our modern situations, then those are the kinds that we retain. For example, siguro, in the field of biodiversity, I think Igorots have practice a sustainable a practice for sustainable biodiversity. That's very traditional, no? But it is important. It is useful in today's environmental situations. Okay? Pwede nating i-adapt yung mga ganon. As for others na hindi naman functional sa ating buhay, I do not think we have to cling to this. Okay?
Thank you for the answer, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir, sa DPWH. From Ms. Roda, what is the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural borrowing? Are both not cases of cultural plagiarism?
Yes, Ma'am Roda, they are actually the same, except that borrowing was used, I think, in the field of medieval studies, in the field of art history. That's what they use. It's borrowing. But in the 70s, it is now understood as cultural appropriation. And yes, there is, of course, plagiarism in both. So it's just a matter of use. Anong field ginagamit yon? For the field of arts, they use borrowing. And in a previous period, whereas appropriation, nag-start yan ng 1970s from cultural studies. Okay, but popularly it is now seen as appropriation. Pero the same yung acts na nangyayari.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ma'am Roda. Also, we have to ask a question online. We have Ma'am Edna Tabanda. Please unmute, ma'am.
Am I unmute? Okay. Thank you very much, Ryan. And thank you very much, Dr. Anongos, for a very informative topic. No, this is my first time to learn about the term na cultural appropriation. No, so it's very good that we are having all of these topics discussed through webinar. No? And I'm very happy that you came up with this topic, no? You know, you mentioned about how can we protect, preserve our culture. And there's this Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. It has been approved for a long, long time. However, it has not been fully implemented. So I believe that if NCIP can appropriate funds for research, di ba? For research, for IEC, just like what we're doing, and really come up with studies on health, practices of indigenous people, the Cordillera, on the environment, how to protect it, just like in Ifugao, how they protect their forests, no? So this could be documented sana eh. So it's really the outsiders who are doing all of this, as you mentioned, no? This research, these studies. But what about us in the Cordillera, in the indigenous people themselves? We have professionals, we have doctors there, no? So maybe through policies, especially the academic institutions, to go into research, no? What are relevant. If we really would like to promote, preserve our culture, I believe that it should be us, no? The indigenous people here in the Cordillera, who should be in the forefront of all of this. However, even the DepEd, all agencies concerned in the promotion of culture, the practices, the IKSPs, no, this should be highlighted, no. I was even thinking about parliamentary rules and procedures, no. Why is it we are adopting the Robert's rules? Why can't we not indigenize? Parang ganun ba, hindi ba? So maybe we could broaden our perspective in terms of really promoting our culture and not have this cultural appropriation. Parang tayo, and you mentioned about who are the stronger, the outsiders or the insiders, no? So we have to assert. For example, also again, in the designs, no? Nardas, I think there was no patent, no? For her designs. So everybody goes into copying the designs of Narda, or even the Easter school, no? So how even our indigenous plants, no, they're stealing our indigenous plants and they make it their own. You see, so this is free prior informed consent. So there must be policies, and it's in the IPRA already. The social aspect, the even the women, no. Look, they have not been including the women, the indigenous women, and we should be sensitive on that because now looking into the protection of the indigenous women also in the Cordillera. So again, policies should be there. Policy in the DepEd, and they should be in the forefront eh. Because gaya yung presentation ni Dr. Revilius na sa textbooks, puro wrong information, wrong representation of itong mga indigenous peoples or the culture, no? So I believe that strengthen or implement fully the IPRA, no? The IPRA, then come up with their own programs, no? And how do the indigenous, and then maybe harmonizing yung mga indigenous culture with by enhancing maybe, but not necessarily parang kung minsan nakikita natin ang customs natin you don't see na it's a custom, maybe because of innovations or yung mga people there who are copying, no, and coming up with wrong concept. Kasi pag outsider ka, this is being presented in a program. Is that really the costume of the indigenous people or the Kalingas or because they are being mixed already, you see? So parang nahalo-halo na ang mga designs. even the dances, no? Even the dances. Yung ano ba, you study yung movements, parang ganun ba? Movements of the hand. What does it signify? Mga ganun ba, no? All of this should
Thank
be
you, Ma'am.
looked into.
Thank you,
So
Ma'am
this is
Edna.
my suggestion. So Ryan, thank you very much
Yeah.
now for giving me this opportunity.
We
But
take
look
note
into
of those suggestions.
Yeah.
We take
That's
note
it,
of the
policy.
suggestions and we will include it in our policy making and forward it to the NCIP.
Yeah,
Ma'am, on Friday we will be discussing more on this, or the books, and then yung mga other issues po. I think hopefully we will be having Congressman Mangawang also on Friday. We are hoping to have him. Para at least there will be yung sa policies natin. He is naman the chair of the indigenous peoples sa Committee on Indigenous Peoples sa Congress. He could help us also in whatever policies, whatever suggestions we have here in this webinar, we forward it to him. So thank you, Ma'am Edna. Ma'am, can we have, if you could you could write all your suggestions and submit it so that we could discuss on Friday or during the policy making. Thank you very much, ma'am. So next question. So, yon. We take note of Ma'am Edna's suggestions, yung sa mga sa textiles, sa proper use of proper dances, and the corrections on the entries sa textbooks. So, sir, Dr. Anos, anything you want to comment on the statement of Ma'am Edna?
Yeah, I agree with Ma'am Edna. Thank you for those observations. Because although we are talking about cultural appropriations there, the issue of appropriation is actually bigger than it is. It actually implicates us all. Now, like Ma'am Edna mentioned some agencies that should be actively supporting. For example, a campaign for IKSP with DepEd and CHED. DepEd started already with iPad, I understand. And I think many of the DepEd schools have adopted or adopting iPad frames. Although there are also issues that we are hearing, like some teachers would come, for example, to us and ask us to help them how to do all of this integration of IKSP, or what to integrate and what not. For NCIP, of course, partner natin palagi ang NCIP, and it really has to be more assertive about this one. It should be in the forefront of seeing to it, that we do not commit these forms of harmful cultural appropriations. Thank you, Ma'am Edna.
Thank you, sir. From Sir Farland Valera, there are 2 points. His question: if one group of people uses material culture gifted to it by another group as a result of ceremonial or political arrangements, such as sipat in a Fochong, Padon, or Pachan, will it qualify as appropriation?
Thank you, Farland. Our definition of appropriation requires that there should be a more dominant culture over another. So in this case, okay, the gifts that happen in the context of sipat or puchung or vuchung, okay, does not qualify as a form of appropriation unless, this is also a discussion of can one ethno-linguistic group in the Cordillera commit cultural appropriation over another ethno-linguistic group in the Cordillera. No? It's problematic from our definition because if we say that one group, medyo nag-divert ako for land, no? When you say that one group appropriates from another, parang, then we are also saying that there is an exercise of power over the other. Kasi ang isang characteristic nga ng appropriation is power. But I think in the context of these ritual and ceremonial practices do not fall, no? Precisely because there is the absence of power relations, maybe as defined in our discussions, and of course you have to go back to the purpose, okay, of the exchange, of the transfer of one object to another. If it doesn't result to harm or offend the others, then it is not part of cultural appropriation.
Thank you. From Manong Art Tibaldo, okay, ang ating one of our partners sa SIPSI from DTI. Can the good speaker please discuss or talk about the so-called Kulityagangs? Does this term rightfully refer to half-breeds or mestizos?
Sir Art,
talk,
Sir Art, ito yung mga areas talaga, no? Na I was talking kasi a while ago about who are insiders and outsiders, no? And I said that it's really difficult to do that, like to identify who are insiders and who are not. So the Kulityagang, where will they be placed in this classification? Will they be insider or outsider? It's really difficult to say. In fact, some scholars would refuse to actually define who are insider or outsider. But when you talk of Kulityagang, by the way, the Kulityagang, correct me, Sir Art, if I'm wrong, is I think a corruption of a term, Kulityagang, new, parang Kristiyano, no? Kulityagang, Kristiyano, okay? And it refers to the Ilocanos who migrated in many parts of the Cordillera, like Bontoc. And so I think the question there is, saan sila? Diba? Insider ba yun or outsider? So I provided nga some basic ways of doing that, yung origin, yung place, and of course the adherence to core cultural practices. Mahirap, no? Mahirap actually to classify people, especially if doing so would actually marginalize some groups. I think I do not have a very definite answer here, Sir Art.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sir Art. I hope yun, although there is no definite answer, pero Dr. Anongos said something naman about the Kulityagang. Pero right term po ba yun? Yung sabi ni Sir Art, right term po ba yun to call those the mestizos, sir? Dr. Anongos? Is it a right term to refer to half-breeds or mestizos? Saan ba yun galing? Yeah.
Is it a right term to call them Kulityagang? Yes. Kulityagang, in the same way as Igorot, have always been associated with negative connotations. If Igorots is an address loaded with meanings from the lowlands and from outsiders, yung Kulityagang is also a term loaded with negative connotations by the Bontocs, for example, against Ilocanos, no, who came to the area. We have in history, we have the capacity to actually appropriate this, what used to be negative terms, okay, and transform them to become positive. Like, the concept of Igorot have always been associated with bad connotations. But over time, we have actually used it, okay, as part of our identity.
Okay, thank you. From Sir Eugene Patinglag, what about the modernization of lots of Cordillera dances and wearing of ethnic uniforms, usually during Panagbanga festivals, and other ethnic presentation endanger the originality of our cultural heritage, consider also as cultural appropriation?
Yes, as I've said, Panagbanga and many other cultural festivals are always full of cultural appropriations. Again, we have to be guided by criterions like sino bang gumawa, outsider ba or insider? And then the guideline on is it making us look bad, okay, or is it okay? No? Yung mga ganon, yeah? So the Panagbanga and like many other festivals really portray, okay, and support a lot of cultural appropriations. That is true.
Yeah, sometimes nga, di ba? Well, we do not blame the LGUs, but of course, it's for them also to promote their products, their culture. Kaya nangyayari ito. So maybe it's between the LGU, the tourism, and NCIP na. So next, from wait. From, of course, he's with us here, from Sir Art Arrow. When did the concept of cultural appropriation came into being or emanated? Because the early writers or sociologists, anthropologists may not be aware of this issue during their time.
Thank you, Sir Art. Yeah, I get the point. Like it's a recent concept, and we use that concept to judge earlier behaviors. Like I mentioned a while ago, the concept started in the 1970s, and this is in the field of cultural studies. So at the time, they were questioning cultural interpretations and representations in the works of researchers and ethnographies. Like I've said also, before the use of cultural appropriation, the terms that they actually used are borrowing, things like that. But in definition, they have absorbed these early terms to the concept of cultural appropriation. Yes, it was not there before Jenks, for example, wrote his Bontok Igorots. But we can still use, we can still use the concept, although developed only in the 70s, to actually mark, these kinds of scholarly activities. Okay. In fact, before this siguro, we do not know. For many of us, we are not aware of cultural appropriation. We only came to know about this now, but it doesn't excuse appropriations that happened before we came to know about the concept. Okay? It is still cultural appropriation.
Thank you. From Ms. Christine Baniquet de la Cruz of BSU, how can we act on people who had cultural appropriation on Cordilleran culture? For example, a dance used in the national competition, but one Cordilleran coach knew she couldn't argue because she has no written record about it, and the organizer said that that they had researched about it and was published?
Yes, as they told us in PASOK conferences, whenever delegation from CAR complain about the dances, Cordillera dances being exhibited, they would always tell us, why don't you do your own book? Why don't you do your own dance choreography? Okay? That has always been the challenge. That's why I said that I think we have to take the challenge. IFSU, for example, I like the PE teachers at IFSU. They have started coming up with dance notations. And I think we have to support these kinds of activities being done in the SUCs. Okay? We really have to write it. Of course, ang next naman na struggle dyan is how to sell what we worked on, how to how to compel, for example, the Philippine Folk Art Society to actually include, okay, our notations of dances in the list, okay, of dances that they use as dance piece competitions. So we really have to do it. We can always criticize them, but that's just part of what we have to do. We can always criticize them, okay, but we really do also have to do something on our end, no? And we are doing some of this actually. Thank you.
Thank you. We have this last question na po to, from, of course, our good friend, also an indie film producer and director, Mr. Julius Lumiked. Judging cultural appropriation, when we take a tattoo artist, I think it's just a comment. Judging cultural appropriation, when we take a tattoo artist and call her the last name Mambabatok, which seemingly is a marketing ploy, we all know there are people who does traditional tattooing scattered in the Cordilleras. Ito siguro kay Wangod. And any commercial use of that name made outside the Cordillera is under her name and permission, when designs are supposed to be owned by the IP group where she belongs. Fe Julio Donato, for me, my opinion, that's another. So yun po ang comments ni Mr. Lumiked. Of course, another comment from Fe Julio Donato. On my own opinion, only cup is better than a sandal. Dun sa sandal, Okay. From Mr. Jason Palag sa MPSPC, is there a way to access this book by Albert Ernst Jenks? The books he presented, sir.
Yes, they are very accessible. Even the work of Albert Jenks on Bontok is in the web. You can find it dun sa Gothenburg, something you can key in Albert Jenks, and you can actually find it. And downloadable dun sa Gothenburg library. No? For Finin market, I think we have copies pa yata at UP Baguio. I am not sure because that's a recent work. The kay Finin, yung kay Scott, I think they are in the libraries. Kay Reed, some of Lawrence Reed's work are also in the internet. You can actually access them. These are actually very accessible references.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for those questions. And thank you, Dr. Anongos, for answering. To summarize what has been discussed by Dr. Anongos this morning, so cultural appropriation can be defined as taking from another culture, not one's own. The arts, it includes the arts, history, ideas, cultural expressions, material culture, symbols, songs, stories, identity, knowledge, religion, science, and dances. And redefinition of culture into their own frame of mind, the cultural representations from outsiders, example of which are parts of dances taken as uniform standard steps of dances. Dances are a rendition to contemporary forms of dances, and some movements including attires are merged into the contemporary performance, even making the choreographers, researchers, award winners. Marami ito sa napapanood natin sa TV, sa shows ng NCCA, shows ng there's really cultural misappropriation. Power relations, wherein one culture is dominant over the other. An equal relation is rooted historically by making particular groups special, noticeable during the colonial period and the post-colonial period. Igorots are termed as minority, making our treatment as second-class citizens. These made our needs as secondary. Historical differentiation have led to the treatment of indigenous people as a weaker culture, and promotion of personal and political agenda, as in the case of Madrid Expo, St. Louis Expo, and the Worcester's Kanyao and photographs. The fifth, the practice of ethnography and other researches by foreigners. Researchers become collectors of material, culture, and brought it to field museums. Research is one of the perpetrators of cultural appropriations. Even in recent times, foreigners have been leading in the conduct of research and even deemed by primary sources of materials. So, yon why why outsiders had to take part of culture. Aesthetics, part of culture is taken as a means of promotion. Of course, commercial, part of culture is taken to earn from what is taken at the expense of culture. Academic, researches done by non-Cordillerans, authors are even well awarded. And of course, political. Appropriation requires an element of an outsider and insider. What composes the criteria to be considered who are insiders? The origin and descent. To be considered as an insider, one must have descent of the culture represented, and of course adheres to certain core practices. It is also discussed, where can cultural appropriation be very visible in contemporary times? In the field of arts, the clothing, attires, tourism, and festivals, an important context in cultural misrepresentation. Culture is commercially promoted. And fashion and expression. The context of representation, the Igorots are always the same, with tattoos and nakedness. So parang ganun lahat yung pinoportray sa Igorot. And of course, a lot more has been discussed. Those who will be requesting for the copy of the PowerPoint presented by Dr. Anongos, it will be sent to your emails po. So we hope, thank you. We thank our participants on Zoom and Facebook. We hope to see you again during our next forum. For the next webinar, you need to register again on the online registration, which will be posted on Facebook. So there will be another, you have to register again, ano? The third forum will be the topic will be understanding cultural preservation and cultural innovation. We will be having several speakers. I think more than 2 speakers during this forum. And we'll be posting also the invitation online. Again, we remind the participants, only those who participated in 3 webinars will be given certificates of participation. And again, reminder to please respond to the event evaluation. The link is at the Zoom, is also provided in Zoom. So thank you. Again, to our participants, maraming salamat po, and we hope to be with you again next week. And to our speaker for this morning, thank you very much, sir. We have here a certificate of appreciation for the Regional Development Council and the Committee on Indigenous Peoples' Concerns presents this to Stanley F. Anongos Jr. in appreciation of his contribution as resource speaker on delving into cultural appropriation in the webinar series on Indigenous Peoples' Rights, Innovation in Arts and Culture, and Autonomy in celebration of the Indigenous Peoples Month, given this 14th day of October 2020 in Baguio City, Philippines. Signed, Maria Jocelyn V. Bernos, Chairperson RDC CAR and Governor Province of Abra, and Manuel A. Haramilia, Chairperson SIPC and Regional Director NCIP CAR. Thank you very much, sir. And here's a simple token. Thank you, thank you. See you next week. Thank you po, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the day.